One of the most common misconceptions about hurricanes is that the wind is the primary factor. And while wind is a significant threat of hurricanes, the most significant threat is the storm surge. And the storm surge with this particular system, Hurricane Helene, is going to be a particularly dangerous situation with this type of system. So we need to prepare, we need to know what's going to happen, and we're going to cover all of that in today's forecast. Now, as I just mentioned, the storm surge is typically the most dangerous part of a hurricane. And as you can see here, this is definitely the case with Hurricane Helene. We see here, for the areas in the pink, we see areas of 12 plus feet of storm surge. And you can see those areas stretch from the Apalachicola area all the way down to just north of Tampa Bay. So these areas are dangerous areas where we're expecting 15 to 20 feet of storm surge via the National Hurricane Center forecast. And here you can see everywhere on Florida's west coast, all the way up to about Pensacola, is expecting some sort of storm surge from the system. And the most significant areas are indicated by that orange, red, and pink. So we see there, those are the areas where you want to pay attention the most. However, everywhere that's being affected by storm surge is somewhere where you really want to pay attention, because storm surge is no joke, and with these systems, it's definitely a deadly aspect to these storms. Now, I want to put that into perspective, because a lot of times 15 to 20 feet, sure, that's a big number, but what is that? Think about the typical home, okay? If you have a 2-story home, that's at least half of your house, okay? And if you have a coastal home, obviously some of those are built on stilts. That's easily coming up to the top of those stilts, and that can even push homes off of their foundation. So this is a very significant aspect to these areas. And while a lot of these areas in the pink are not populated areas, there are towns and coastal communities along this area that are going to have to heed those warnings. We see that even Tampa Bay, according to this map, is expecting 5 to 8 feet of storm surge. So I am a 6-foot person myself, and that is taller than me if I was standing on the shore. So obviously this is something that you really need to take into consideration when you're planning on either staying and riding out the storm or leaving and going to higher elevation. So please keep that in mind. 15 to 20 feet though, that is very significant, and that is life-threatening storm surge. So you need to take that very seriously as we reach landfall tomorrow. All right, now taking a look at our next product here, we're taking a look at a summary of what all the forecast models are saying of the storm track. So you want to know where the main core of the storm is going, or the eye wall will be making landfall. And these areas show you the track. So this is a group of forecast models. We call this our spaghetti map because it looks like spaghetti noodles. And as you can see, the main course is looking around the Apalachicola area. That's kind of where we're seeing that main track heading for tomorrow. So we're going to be expecting this tomorrow to make landfall around that area. Now, obviously, there's a wider and greater area that's going to be affected, but that's the main area where the center of that system is expected to make landfall. And then obviously we see it gets a little more variable as we go further into land and we start to go further days out, where we see that potential for it to drift off either eastward, but I do believe that it's going to become stationary over Tennessee, which could also pose a threat to significant rainfall accumulation over this area as well. Now, instead of looking at each individual model track, what we're going to do is we're going to take out of those spaghetti models, we're going to take 3 of the best known forecast models, the most accurate ones for tropical storm forecasting. So we see here, we have an average of the models that typically do the best with tropical storm forecasting. So here we have the first one, the ECMWF, which is the European forecast model. We have the second one, the GFS, the global forecast system. And then we have our third, which is the HWRF, which is the Hurricane Weather Research and Forecasting model. So these 3 models we're going to go into today. We're going to look at our reflectivity, which is the rainfall, and then we're going to look at our wind speeds that are supposed to be affected, and we're going to kind of get an average from all 3 of these of what we can expect to see for tomorrow. Now, taking a look at our GFS run here, we see I put it in a fast mode, so it's going to go pretty quick to keep this forecast fairly short, but I do want to make sure that you notice how it's covering a widespread area. Okay, so all of Florida is going to receive rainfall from this tropical system. Now, some areas won't receive as much, but we see the blunt of the rainfall is going to be centered over that panhandle, Florida panhandle, and north central Florida. Then we see a lot of eastern Alabama, portions of Georgia, pretty much the entire state of Georgia, that is, and then we see portions of western South Carolina, and the Great Smoky Mountains is where the main concern for me of the flooding is going to be. Okay, so we have the coastal flooding, but we see that massive inundation of all that rainfall going to the southern Appalachian Range and affecting much of the Smoky Mountains there, so that's something we need to pay attention to. But focused on the track right now, you do see that the track is in agreement with the spaghetti models that we looked at earlier, and we can see that Apalachicola in that area, that little tiny dip in the Florida Peninsula, is where we're expecting the center of the landfall to be tomorrow. All right, now looking at our European reflectivity track here, we see a similar scenario, a little more precipitation over Georgia. We see more of a widespread orange area, so that orange blob of that higher level of reflectivity there. So that's indicating heavier precipitation over Georgia. I don't know how much I believe that, just because it's a giant red area, which typically doesn't happen in these systems post landfall, but we will see a lot of precipitation either way moving over this area, and a lot of inundation of water and accumulated precipitation tomorrow. We also see the track verifies with the spaghetti forecast models. So we do see here it shifts a little further east than what the GFS was saying, but we do see overall it's headed for the Florida Panhandle, and that's the area we're going to want to focus tomorrow for landfall. All right, now finally taking a look at our HWRF forecast model here, we're seeing a similar scenario. Again, more of an eastward track than the GFS, so this might be kind of a trend that we need to focus on, a possible eastward shift there, but overall the same area that we're focusing in on. I don't think it's going to shift too far east from the Apalachicola area. I think that's our center of attention here with this storm, but I do believe that overall we're going to see it right in the eastern half of the Florida Peninsula, and I do believe that's where the center of that landfall is going to be, and we're going to see a lot of inundation there of not only rainfall but also storm surge as well. All right, so now we're going to be looking at our estimated wind gusts with these forecast models. So we're going to be first going with the GFS here. You can see a lot of widespread pinks and reds. Those are your lower end winds, and while those still are strong because some of those are getting up into the 40s and 50s, we see the most concerning wind is going to be in those yellows and browns. Those are the areas where you want to pay attention the most. So the shades of yellow and brown are the areas where you're really going to want to pay attention. We see a lot of those areas for Tampa and north of there all the way up to the Apalachicola area. All those areas are going to be undergoing this significant type of wind. We're going to see anywhere of 60 plus mile per hour wind gusts, which, if you didn't know, is above the standards for a severe thunderstorm warning. A severe thunderstorm warning is issued with 58 mile per hour wind gusts and up. So obviously these are severe winds, okay? And when this moves through this area, this is going to cause either widespread power outages or it's going to lead to wind damage. So all of these areas need to be paying attention. Anywhere in here, you can see the GFS has that anywhere from Tampa and north, and this is going to carry up into Georgia. I don't have that in that frame right now, but this is going to continue into the next day into Georgia. So we're going to see into Friday and into the weekend. That's going to carry up into the Smoky Mountains as well. And obviously those winds will calm down after landfall, but we're still going to see tropical storm force winds well into land and after landfall. All right, now looking at our ECMWF, or our European forecast model, we see the same scenario here, very similar to what the GFS was saying. We see just above Tampa, only a little bit more to the southern end. We do see a lot of the Gulf Coast areas all the way down from the southern tip of Florida are seeing those widespread yellows and browns. So that's 60 mile per hour wind gusts and up. And then we do see a lot of those 100 mile per hour wind gusts are going to be centered just southeast of Apalachicola along the northwest portions of the Florida Peninsula there. And you can see a lot of areas are estimated to be within that 100 plus mile per hour wind range upon landfall. So those are areas where you're really going to want to pay attention to that type of wind threat that we're talking about. All right, now we're taking a look at our HWRF here. This is our final forecast model that we're going over with the wind. And as you can see, we see a smaller centered area of those yellows and browns. It's not as large as what the GFS and the European were suggesting, but that's still a widespread area. We see anywhere, Tampa is included in this now. So we see Tampa is pretty much engulfed by these yellow wind speeds here. And what that means is 60 and up. And then we see even some of those 70 mile per hour wind gusts are hitting Tampa. I don't believe that's out of the question. I do believe we could see some 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts in Tampa Bay and around those areas. So anywhere along Florida's west coast needs to be prepared for tropical storm force winds. Now, I'm suggesting more of the northwest portions of that Gulf Coast. I do believe that's going to be more of where you're going to see that. So anywhere southeast of Apalachicola and north of Tampa is where you're going to want to be paying the most attention to those tropical storm force winds and even hurricane force winds right upon landfall. So you got to be paying attention between those areas. Now, all of these areas indicated here need to be watching. So anywhere along Florida's west coast, you have the potential to see those higher wind gusts. But overall, I do believe your main threat is going to be between Apalachicola and Tampa. All right, now moving on to our next forecast graphic here. This is from the National Hurricane Center again. And what we see here is this is their earliest timing. So this would be your earliest reasonable arrival time for the tropical system. So already by 2 a.m. tomorrow morning, that's Thursday morning, we're going to be seeing that potential for the southwestern portions of Florida to be experiencing those tropical storm force winds. Then we see around 8 a.m., that's just north of Tampa, we start to see those tropical storm force winds. And then we do see around Thursday 2 p.m., we see up there, this is entirely over the entire state of Florida now. So the entire state of Florida is now going to be expecting those tropical storm force winds around 2 p.m. at the earliest. So again, this is the earliest reasonable time that this could happen. And then finally, we see Thursday at 8 p.m. That's way up into Georgia and portions of Alabama. However, we are going to move on to the most likely arrival times, which is likely what you're going to expect. But I wanted to put these earliest times out here just so that you have an idea of what could happen in case it does. All right, so now we're looking at our National Hurricane Center most likely arrival time. So this is a bit of a change. It still looks similar to what we looked at before, but if you look at the times, they're different. So what we see here is now Southwest Florida, instead of 2 a.m., is now 8 a.m. So 8 a.m. for Southwest Florida, this is your most likely arrival time of these tropical storm force winds. Then we see just north of Tampa and south of Tallahassee, we see those 2 p.m. timing for tropical storm force winds tomorrow. That's again your most likely time frame. And then we see for 8 p.m. tomorrow, Thursday, we're expecting those southern portions of Alabama and Georgia to start experiencing those tropical storm force winds. And then finally, Friday at 8 a.m. is when around the Smoky Mountains in southeastern Tennessee, that's when you're expecting to experience those tropical storm force winds moving into those areas. Now, speaking of tropical storm force winds, this is our National Hurricane Center graphic to show you where tropical storm force winds are most likely. So this is your probability map. So anywhere in those pinks is going to be 90% chance and above of tropical storm force winds. So as you can see here, this map is kind of self-explanatory. You can look and pinpoint where you're at on this map, but overall, the main area that you're really going to want to be paying attention to is in that pink area. So those reds and pinks, that's where you're really getting those highest chances, 80 to 90%, and then 90 and above for those pinks. But either way, those areas are where you're going to want to pay attention to the most for these tropical storm force winds. All right, now we're looking at our next map, which is our probability forecast of hurricane force wind speeds. So now you see a little lessened graph here. We don't see any pink. We don't see any 90% chance. At the coastal areas around Apalachicola, we actually see a 60 to 70% chance for those areas. So you may be wondering to yourself, what is the difference between tropical storm force winds and hurricane force? Well, hurricane force is 74 miles per hour and up, and then tropical storm force winds are winds anywhere sustained of 39 miles per hour or above. So basically, that's what you're expecting. If you're in the tropical storm force probability map, you're expecting anywhere 39 mile per hour winds sustained. And then in here, you're expecting 74 mile per hour winds sustained or above. So that's what we're expecting here for hurricane force winds. So that 70% area, which is the area south of Tallahassee and around the Apalachicola area, that's where you're really going to want to be paying attention to those hurricane force winds. Obviously, a lot of flooding with that because we see the push on shore of all that water, all of the storm surge, and then we also see those high winds that can be damaging to structures as well. All right, now we're going to be looking at our precipitation forecast here for the Gulf of Mexico. This is our National Weather Service Weather Prediction Center totals for rainfall, and here you can see a lot of widespread areas in those areas of 4 inches and up, or indicated by the yellow, is where you're really going to want to pay attention for that accumulation. So anywhere, again, in those yellows and oranges and browns, that's where you're going to want to pay attention to the most for those rainfall totals. We see widespread 4-inch plus areas around that Florida peninsula there, around the Florida panhandle, and especially around the Tallahassee area. So a lot of rainfall is expected, but we also see for portions of Tampa Bay, we actually see around 3 to 5 inches there being expected of precipitation. So we're also going to see a lot of rainfall for areas along Florida's west coast, anywhere south of Tampa and north of Tampa there. You see anywhere along the west coast, we see those 3 to 5 inch range regions there for rainfall. So that's an area where you also have to watch out for heavy rainfall. And then we see the rainfall threat really ends around Pensacola. So around the Pensacola area, that's where you start to get into those reds, which is a less threat. Obviously, 2.5 inches is still a lot of precipitation, even into 3 inches, but that's not so much as 4+ inches of rainfall, which is expected in those yellow, orange, and brown regions. All right, now our next area on the forecast map is going to be the Ohio Valley. Now you see where the system stalls out, you can actually see the giant bubble there of those red colors. Now that's about 2 to 3 inches of rainfall widespread for Tennessee and the Ohio Valley. We see lots of rainfall accumulation there, so a lot of areas to watch out for potential flooding as well, although 2 to 3 inches shouldn't generally cause you much problems there. But our main focus and the main concern for the flooding is actually going to be on the eastern side of the Appalachians. So we see some of the western side of the Appalachians get some pretty decent rainfall totals as well. 4 to 6 inches, that's a lot. but we also see on the eastern side, in the top of those mountains, we see a lot of rainfall, 4 to 7 inches, some areas reaching up to 10 inches along those areas of the Appalachian Mountains, which is going to be a significant area of inundation of rainfall accumulation. These are areas we're going to want to pay attention for significant flooding along the eastern side of these mountains. Okay, not only do we have the accumulation at the foothills, but we also have the accumulation at the top of those mountains, which what goes up must come down. And that's going to come down along the side of those mountains. That's going to wash down through the streams and rivers, and that's going to create more of a rainfall threat. And I do believe we're going to see some significant flooding issues on the eastern side of those mountains there. So please consider that anywhere Thursday into Friday, that's where you're going to see your main threat for that heavy rainfall and flooding potential. All right, now the final maps that we're going to be going over in today's video are the excessive rainfall outlooks from the National Weather Service. And we're going to be going over day 1 and day 2. Now, day 1 is today, Wednesday, and day 2 is Thursday. So as you can see right now, day 1, we see a high risk, so that's 70% and above of that excessive rainfall outlook, and that is on the eastern side of the Smoky Mountains. So think of this as a National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center outlook for storms and severe weather. If you've ever seen that, this is the same type of category, but we see a high risk for that excessive rainfall accumulation. So this is an area we're going to want to watch. This doesn't happen every day. This is a pretty rare occasion for this type of setup, and we are going to see a lot of rainfall inundation along the eastern side of the Smokies and the Appalachian Mountains, down mostly in western North Carolina, but we see also some of that in portions of northwestern South Carolina, and then we also see portions of northeastern Georgia there that are expecting to receive a lot of rainfall, and this is an area we're going to want to watch out for flooding tonight and into tomorrow. Now for day 2 tomorrow, which is Thursday, we're going to be looking at the same scenario for the eastern portions of the Appalachian Mountains there. We see almost the same areas as today see the high risk for excessive rainfall, but we also see some new areas down there on the Florida Peninsula there. We also see another high risk for excessive rainfall. So these are 2 distinct areas we're going to want to watch out for. We also don't want to overlook the other areas as well, such as the red moderate risk. That's also another area where you're going to want to really pay attention to the risk of excessive rainfall. But the high risk are the areas where I want to pinpoint the most, because these are areas of significant rainfall inundation that are expecting high accumulation rates and totals from rainfall. All right, I want to thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. If you did enjoy this forecast, I would ask you to consider subscribing for more U.S. forecasts free of charge, and I would also ask that you consider following the Weather at a Glance official Facebook page for more inside information and complimentary personal forecasts when you message me on my Facebook page. I want to give a big shout out to today's sources, Pivotal Weather and Tropical Tidbits, where you saw those forecast models and graphics. Those are where those both came from. And I also want to give a shout out to the National Hurricane Center for providing those outlooks that you saw in today's video. I also want to give a huge shout out to our channel members, Chris, Betty, and Jay Case. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Now with that, stay safe folks throughout tomorrow's storm and weather wear always, and I will see you in the next video.